Isaac's first memory was of shadows, long, creeping things that slithered across the walls of his room at night, whispering secrets in a language he couldn't understand. He was only 3 years old when he first noticed them. Dark shapes that seemed to move with a will of their own. At first, he thought they were just tricks of the light, figments of his imagination, but the shadows never left, and neither did the whispers. They were always there, just out of reach, just out of sight, but always watching, always waiting. As he grew older, Isaac began to realize that what he saw wasn't normal. Other children didn't see the shadows, didn't hear the voices. His parents were no help either. His mother dismissed his fears as childish nonsense, while his father insisted that shadows were just shadows, nothing more. "You're just having nightmares," they would say. But Isaac knew better. He could feel the shadows watching him, feel the cold chill in the air when they were near. He learned to keep his fears to himself, to pretend that everything was normal, even when he knew it wasn't. By the time Isaac was 6, the shadows had become a constant presence in his life. They no longer waited for nightfall to appear. Instead, they would emerge during the day, lurking in the corners of his vision, always just out of reach. He would catch glimpses of them at school, in the playground, even in broad daylight. They were like living creatures, slipping between the cracks of reality, unseen by everyone but him. One day, while playing alone in his backyard, Isaac saw a shadow standing beneath the old oak tree. It was different from the others. Taller, darker, more defined. It had a shape, a form that resembled a person, but its features were indistinct, like a figure seen through fog. Isaac stared at it, frozen in place, as the shadow slowly turned its head toward him. Though it had no eyes, Isaac could feel it looking at him, feel its gaze like a weight pressing down on his chest. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The shadow took a step forward, and Isaac finally broke free of his paralysis, running inside as fast as his legs would carry him. After that, the shadow appeared more frequently. It would stand at the edge of his vision, just watching him, never coming too close. But Isaac knew it was waiting for something. He could feel its hunger, its need. It wanted him, and it wouldn't stop until it had him. He tried to tell his parents, but they just brushed it off as another nightmare. "You're too old for this," his father said sternly. "There's no such thing as monsters." Isaac knew they wouldn't believe him, so he stopped trying. He kept his fears to himself, hoping that if he ignored the shadow, it would go away. But it didn't go away. Instead, it got closer. When Isaac was 10, the whispers began. At first, they were just faint murmurs, barely audible over the noise of the world. But as the weeks went by, they grew louder, more insistent. They would call his name in the dead of night, a soft, hissing sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Isaac," the voices would say, dragging out his name in a long, drawn-out breath. "Isaac, come to us." He tried to ignore them, tried to block them out, but they wouldn't stop. They followed him everywhere, echoing in his mind, even when there was no one around. Sometimes they would tell him things, terrible things about the people around him. They whispered about his parents, his teachers, his friends, horrible secrets that made his skin crawl. He didn't want to listen, didn't want to know, but the voices wouldn't let him be. The shadow, too, became bolder. It no longer waited at the edge of his vision. Instead, it would appear in his room at night, standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with its hollow, featureless face. Isaac would lie there, frozen with fear, feeling the weight of its gaze like a physical presence. Sometimes it would move closer, its form bending and stretching in ways that defied logic, but it never touched him, never crossed the invisible line that kept it at bay. Yet Isaac knew it was only a matter of time. One night, the whispers became too much to bear. They were louder than ever, a cacophony of voices screaming his name, telling him to come to them, to join them in the darkness. Isaac couldn't take it anymore. He jumped out of bed and ran out of the house into the cool night air. The whispers followed him, growing louder with every step, guiding him, pulling him toward the woods at the edge of town. Isaac had always been afraid of the woods. They were dark and dense, full of strange noises and unseen dangers. But tonight, they seemed almost welcoming, the trees parting before him like like a gateway. He didn't know why he was going there, didn't know what he was looking for, but the whispers drove him forward, urging him deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker as he went, their branches twisting together like the fingers of some great unseen hand. The air was cold and damp, and the ground beneath his feet was soft and spongy, as though it were alive. The whispers were deafening now, a roaring tide of voices that seemed to come from all around him. Isaac stumbled forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps, until he reached a small clearing at the heart of the woods. In the center of the clearing stood a door. It was old and weathered, made of dark wood that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The door was ajar, revealing a sliver of blackness beyond, a void that seemed to swallow all light. Isaac felt a chill run down his spine as he approached the door, the whispers urging him forward, telling him to open it, to step inside. He hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the door. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, screaming at him to open the door, to cross the threshold. Isaac's fingers brushed the rough wood, and for a moment he felt a warmth, a sense of familiarity, as if the door was something he had always known, something that had always been a part of him. With a deep breath, Isaac pushed the door open. The darkness beyond was absolute, a void that seemed to stretch on forever. But as Isaac peered into the blackness, he saw something moving, shifting shapes that coalesced into the form of a figure, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing, hollow eyes, the same figure that had been watching him for years, waiting for this moment. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the darkness like a nightmare-given form. Its limbs were impossibly long and thin, its movements slow and deliberate. It had no face, only a blank expanse of darkness where its features should have been. But Isaac could feel its eyes on him, feel the hunger that radiated from it. The whispers reached a fever pitch, the voices merging into one, a single commanding voice that echoed through the clearing. "Come to me, Isaac," the voice said, deep and resonant. "You have been chosen. You belong to us." Isaac wanted to run, wanted to turn and flee back to the safety of his home, but his legs wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, trapped by the figure's gaze. The shadows around him began to shift, rising from the ground like living things, wrapping around his ankles, his wrists, pulling him toward the door. He struggled, but it was no use. The shadows were too strong, too powerful. They dragged him closer to the door, closer to the waiting figure. The cold seeped into his bones, numbing his limbs, freezing his breath in his throat. The figure reached out, its hand impossibly large and cold as death. Isaac tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows enveloped him, pulling him into the darkness, into the void. The last thing Isaac saw before the door slammed shut was the figure's hollow eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, and the whispers echoing in his mind, telling him that he was theirs, that he had always been theirs. The next morning, Isaac's parents woke to find his bed empty, his room cold and dark. They searched the house, the yard, the neighborhood, but there was no sign of him. The police were called, a search party organized, but Isaac was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. In the years that followed, the town whispered about the boy who disappeared, about the strange things that had happened before he went missing. Some said he had been taken by the spirits in the woods, others that he had run away, driven mad by the things he claimed to see. But no one knew the truth. Deep in the woods, in a forgotten clearing, an old, weathered door stood silently among the trees. The air around it was cold, the ground beneath it soft and spongy, as if it were alive. And if you listened closely, you could hear the whispers, faint and distant, calling for someone to open the door, to step inside, to join them in the darkness. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories that will keep you up at night. Hit the bell icon to stay notified whenever a new nightmare is unleashed.